We're going to start with Mr. Bloom. And you know this routine. You've done it before. You get 5 minutes, and the light system there, you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. So if you can keep it around 5, that'd be great. If you want to go shorter, that's fine too. But we'll go with Mr. Bloom, then Mr. Snowbarger. Go ahead.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Kucinich, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm here to report on the Obama administration's investments in GM and Chrysler. As you may know, since February 2011, I've served on the National Economic Council as Assistant to the President for Manufacturing Policy. While I'm here today in my capacity as a former Treasury official, I no longer work at Treasury and therefore no longer participate in the oversight of Treasury's automotive investments. Thus, I'm not in a position to discuss events since February 2011 or anything concerning possible future actions. Further, I understand that the committee has taken an interest in issues regarding the pensions of certain former employees of the Delphi Corporation. As has been communicated to your staff over the last few days, and as I communicated in a letter to the Chairman yesterday, I'm a party to a lawsuit that is currently pending in Federal Court in Michigan. I've been named as a defendant in that matter in both my official capacity as a former Treasury employee as well as in my individual capacity. I am therefore not in a position to speak to the Delphi pension issue in any way. When President Obama took office, the American automobile industry was on the brink of collapse. In the year before President Obama took office, the industry shed 400,000 jobs. As 2008 came to a close, both GM and Chrysler were running out of cash and faced the prospect of uncontrolled liquidations. Therefore, the previous administration provided $24.8 billion of support to the auto industry. When President Obama took office, we faced a full-fledged recession. Our financial system was still exceedingly fragile, and GM and Chrysler were requesting additional assistance. After studying the restructuring plans submitted by the companies, President Obama decided that he would not commit additional taxpayer resources to these companies without fundamental change and accountability. He rejected their initial plans and demanded that they develop more ambitious strategies to reduce costs and increase efficiencies to become sustainable. However, President Obama also recognized that failing to stand behind these companies would have consequences that extended far beyond their factories and workers. GM and Chrysler were supported by a vast network of auto suppliers. Because Ford and other auto companies depended on those same suppliers, the failure of the suppliers could have caused those auto companies to fail as well. Also at risk were the thousands of auto dealers across the country, as well as countless small businesses and communities with concentrations of auto workers. It was the interdependence among the automakers, suppliers, dealers, and communities that led some experts at the time to estimate that at least 1 million jobs could have been lost if GM and Chrysler went under. To avoid this outcome, the President decided to give GM and Chrysler a chance to show that they could take tough and painful steps to become viable, profitable companies and to stand behind them if they could. Working with their stakeholders in the President's Auto Task Force, both GM and Chrysler underwent fair and open bankruptcies that resulted in stronger companies. This process required deep and painful sacrifices from all stakeholders. However, the steps that the President took not only avoided a catastrophic collapse and brought needed stability to the entire auto industry, they also kept hundreds of thousands of Americans working and gave GM and Chrysler a chance to once again become viable, competitive businesses. Today, the American auto industry is mounting a comeback. In 2010, for the first time since 1995, GM, Chrysler, and Ford increased their collective market share. Since June of 2009, the auto industry has added 113,000 jobs, the fastest pace of job growth in the industry since 1998. The U.S. government provided a total of $80 billion to stabilize the U.S. automotive industry. As of today, $40 billion has been returned to taxpayers. While the government does not anticipate recovering all of the funds that it invested in the industry, lost estimates from Treasury and the CBO have consistently improved. Independent analysts estimate that the administration's intervention saved the Federal Government tens of billions of dollars in direct and indirect costs. In a better world, the choice to intervene in GM and Chrysler would not have had to be made. But amidst the worst economic crisis in a generation, the administration's decisions avoided devastating liquidations and provided the American auto industry a new lease on life and a real chance to succeed. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Mr. Snowbarger, you are now recognized.
Good afternoon, Chairman Jordan, and other subcommittee members. I'm Vince Snowbarger, and I'm Deputy Director for Operations at the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. I should also point out that from January 2009 until July of 2010, I was also the Acting Director for the PBGC. I will testify today about the pension plans of the Delphi Corporation, the nation's largest producer of auto parts. As you know, in July of 2009, PBGC stepped in to protect the pensions of Delphi's 70,000 workers and retirees. PBGC will cover about $6 billion of the plan's shortfall. About $1.2 billion of the benefits is not guaranteed by the insurance program. PBGC's interest in Delphi and its pension plans spans the past decade. PBGC began actively monitoring Delphi after the spinoff from GM in 1999. In early 2005, Delphi's credit ratings were downgraded from investment grade to speculative grade. After Delphi entered bankruptcy in October of 2005, PBGC worked intensely with Delphi, GM, and other stakeholders to keep the pension plans ongoing. Delphi consistently told its employees and PBGC that it intended to reorganize with the pension plans ongoing. However, when Delphi failed to make required minimum funding contributions to the plans, liens were triggered against Delphi's non-bankrupt foreign subsidiaries. Beginning of March of 2006, PBGC perfected those liens so that the plans had a secured interest against foreign Delphi entities. In September 2007, Delphi filed a reorganization plan with the Delphi Bankruptcy Court. As a part of that reorganization, GM and Delphi agreed to transfer part of Delphi's hourly plan to GM's hourly plan, and Delphi was to retain all other pension plans, including the salaried plan. In April of 2008, the reorganization deal fell through. However, in the latter half of 2008, Delphi still anticipated that it could reorganize, maintain its salaried plan, and merge the hourly plan into the GM hourly plan. In September of 2008, Delphi and GM, with the approval of the Delphi Bankruptcy Court, planned to transfer up to $3.4 billion of net liabilities from Delphi's hourly plan to GM's hourly plan in 2 phases. The first $2.1 billion was transferred that same month. That's September of 2008. This transfer eliminated PBGC's lien on behalf of the hourly plan. The subsequent downturn in the auto markets left Delphi unable to pay GM the promised consideration for taking the remaining portion of the hourly plan, so the second transfer never occurred. In late July 2009, the Delphi Bankruptcy Court approved Delphi's modified plan of reorganization, calling for the liquidation of the company, termination of its pension plans, and settlement of PBGC's claims. The settlement provided PBGC a $3 billion general unsecured claim against Delphi's bankruptcy estate. The investors in new Delphi required PBGC to release its liens on Delphi's foreign assets before its purchase could proceed. At the time of that settlement, PBGC had a $196 million lien on behalf of the salaried plan. In exchange for releasing the liens, PBGC reached an agreement with the buyers to give PBGC $70 million in cash and a membership interest in the new company. The cash payment and membership interest effectively paid PBGC's salaried plan lien and gave PBGC a reasonable recovery on its other claims in the Delphi bankruptcy. In March of 2011, New Delphi redeemed PBGC's stake in the company for $594 million. I'd point out that's less than 10% of the total underfunding in the plans. However, under statutory rules, the Delphi recoveries may allow PBGC to pay small amounts of additional benefits to older Delphi workers who retired or could have retired by July 31 of 2006, 3 years before the Delphi plans terminated. Companies that sponsor pension plans have a responsibility to live up to the promises they made to their workers and retirees. Plans come to the PBGC because their sponsors have failed to properly fund them. In the unfortunate case like Delphi, where the sponsors fail and liquidate, PBGC is forced to and will step in to protect workers and retirees. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Let me thank both witnesses for their testimony. We're going to start with Mr. Turner. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you again for holding this important hearing. This is an issue that is certainly important in my district, but I think it's important to people throughout the country when they look at an administration stepping in to a bankruptcy, and there are pensions and retirees, and people are picked as winners and losers. They're not treated the same. There's inequality. I think all of Americans should be very concerned about the process that this went through. What is the policy? What does it say about the security that people have in their pensions? And what does it say about the administration's commitment to ensure that people have access to their promised health benefits and to their salaries? Gentlemen, I presented both of you with lists of questions. Mr. Bloom, you received 25. Mr. Snowbarger, you received 30. I'm going to ask for your commitment that you review those questions and that you, to the best of your ability, provide me with answers. Do I have that commitment?
I will.
Absolutely.
Thank you. The questions involve many of the issues that I think that the taxpayers deserve answers to. How did this process go through? How is it that there were winners and losers that were picked? And how can it be resolved, more importantly? Because the issue is, I think this Congress, I know that this Chairman, doesn't want us to just discover what happened. We also want to find out what the solution is. Mr. Bloom, you and I had a conversation just before this hearing reconvened, and I want to, for the record, to restate it. I was telling you that I think that everyone knows that when people aren't treated equally, that there's an injustice or inequality, and that I would like, since you have such a great knowledge and understanding of this issue, your expertise and commitment as to how these salary retirees from Delphi can be made whole. You said you'd be very willing to work with me on that. It goes to my question of, are you working on that? Is that on your to-do list? Because I would really want to know that that the administration has it on its to-do list, that this issue not be that the status quo, that we do look at ways that these salaried retirees can have their pensions restored. Mr. Bloom?
Well, thank you, Congressman. And as I did say to you at the break, I'm certainly happy to sit and talk with you or anyone else who has ideas about how this matter should be dealt with. Look, there is a core unfortunate reality that we face in this entire circumstance. These two companies came to the government, first to the Bush administration and then to the Obama administration, in a state of insolvency. And unfortunately, what that means is, as my colleague has made reference to in another context, is that they simply had made promises to people that were larger than they were able to make, than they were able to honor. And that does not only go to the Delphi salary retirees, it goes, unfortunately, to thousands of different
But Mr. Bloom, just a second. Some of those promises were kept, and at the direction of the administration, they were kept. I mean, the retirees from Delphi were not treated similarly at the direction of the administration. So this is not just promises that they couldn't keep. Selectively, some people's promises were not upheld and others were.
Well, let me try to address that. First thing, as I said, because I am a defendant in the lawsuit, I'm not in a position to comment specifically about Delphi. But I can say this. The company came to the administration with restructuring plans, and we reviewed those overall plans. But we did not make determinations of particular treatment for particular groups. The company came to us with an overall plan, and as was referenced by the Chairman in his opening remarks,
Would gentleman yield for 1 second? Would gentleman yield for 1 second? I just want to ask one clarification on that. The company came to you with a restructuring plan, but isn't it true the Auto Task Force turned down the first plan?
Yes, it is absolutely true. And the reason we did, sir, is we concluded that those plans did not create viable enterprises, and so we sent
the selectivity that the gentleman is getting at certainly took place with the whole restructuring plan because you turned down the very first plan.
It was not selective. We concluded that the overall plan was not viable. We concluded that the company had not made, unfortunately, difficult enough decisions to turn them viable so that if the President was going to commit additional taxpayer resources, we would have a reasonable chance of having viable companies on the back end.
Mr. Bloom, my time is expiring. Mr. Chairman, with your consent, if I could have just one more minute to do a summation.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Bloom, it was the administration picking winners and losers. And that really is the crux of everything that the taxpayers deserve to discover. I mean, that's what this whole hearing process is about. And I want to encourage the Chairman to have additional hearings. I believe that there ought to be subpoenas to the administration. I believe that there ought to be depositions, because this is not something that you just did in a vacuum. You did this with taxpayers' dollars. And the taxpayers will not be made whole, nor will the pensioners who are retirees, salaried retirees from Delphi, but others will. Absolutely. Somewhere in a room at the White House, people were picked as winners and losers. There was inequality and injustice that was done, and we deserve, and we will ultimately get to the bottom of how that was done and what basis that was done. I want to have one more comment, Mr. Chairman, and then I'll yield. The issue of the litigation is not one of requiring you to be silent. It is absolutely for your sole convenience that you stand in front of us and not answer questions based on pending litigation. Because if you made statements to us that were truthful, they wouldn't change the outcome of the litigation, right? Because the statements themselves, it's the actions from which liability arises, not from your statement. So by you not speaking on it today, you're protected in convenience, not as a requirement. True, if you made statements in front of us that were inconsistent, it would go to your issue of veracity in litigation. If you revealed something that perhaps we all didn't know, it might expedite the process of litigation. But speaking in front of a congressional hearing and telling the American public truthfully what happened with their tax dollars and the administration's decision-making does not affect the outcome of litigation. It is only for your convenience, Mr. Chairman. I encourage you to continue investigating this matter and bringing to light what occurred here. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. We'll go next to the ranking member of the full gentleman from Maryland.
Yes, just in the last set of questions, it's not, I would say to the gentleman, it's not that simple. Having been a trial lawyer for almost 30 years, it's not that simple. I'm not trying to defend Mr. Bloom. When you're in litigation, it's just not that simple. But let me go to you, Mr. Bloom. President George Bush extended the first Federal aid to GM totaling $9.4 billion. What did the President require as a condition of that initial aid? Do you know?
I believe, Congressman, thank you for that question. I believe actually the total assistance provided by the Bush administration to General Motors was actually $13.4 billion. The only requirement of that was that the companies come forward with restructuring plans, and those plans were to be come forward by first the 17th of February and then judged on by the 31st of March. So that was the only condition of those loans. There was no condition that the company in any way actually restructure or address its long-seated, deep-seated problems.
So when President Obama came into office, he required both GM and Chrysler to develop plans to restructure their businesses so they could be competitive. GM's initial plan was reviewed, I take it, by the Auto Task Force, which you advised, and that plan was rejected. And so you said that the first plan was not, did you say viable? And what did you, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you all made that's basically a judgment call?
Yes, Congressman. I mean, look, the President very much wanted to find a way to stand behind General Motors and Chrysler if he could, but he also recognized that these companies had made a lot of mistakes over prior years and had gotten themselves insolvent. And as I said earlier, were not in a position to honor the promises they had made. That is a tragic situation that faced all the stakeholders of the company, but that is the situation that we were handed. And so what he insisted is that they make the difficult decisions that included tragically having to close factories and put blue-collar workers out of work. That's a terrible thing to have to do, but the alternative was either A, do nothing and have the companies liquidate in their entirety, in which case every single stakeholder would have done worse than they did, or to simply hand them a blank check and say, because many of these stories are heartrending, we're going to give you all the money that you asked to meet all those promises. Tragically, that would have been a multiple of the money that the President, in fact, extended. So in that light, we chose a middle path. We forced the companies to come up with very tough-minded restructurings as a condition of further assistance.
So you all gave GM 60 days to resubmit, is that right, a plan?
Approximately 60 days after the 31st of March.
And was that plan accepted, the next plan?
The subsequent plan, yes. The subsequent plan, we did choose to back the company and its management who had put forward that plan. We did choose to back that plan and to help them get through bankruptcy in order to effectuate that plan.
So what sort of support did the government give GM during the current administration?
The total funds extended by this President to General Motors are approximately $36.1 billion, Congressman.
Okay. The United States government became the dominant shareholder in GM, owning more than 60% of the company at one time. Was the United States an active or a passive shareholder?
That's a very good question, Congressman. We made a very conscious decision that while we did have to do this intervention because we were in an extraordinary moment in our nation's history, the greatest recession since the Great Depression, et cetera, that we wanted to minimally involve ourselves in the operation of the company. And so after the bankruptcy, we were involved in choosing an exemplary group of men and women to be on the Board of Directors, but we did not involve ourselves in any way in the day-to-day management of the company.
So the operational decisions at GM, you weren't involved in that, is that right?
We very consciously chose not to be involved in those. We left that to the Board of Directors who directs the management, who carries out their will.
Now, I don't know if you can answer this question or not, but you've been accused of, in this hearing, I think, of picking winners and losers. Can you comment on that? Does that?
Well, I guess
when I say picking winners or losers, I mean, was there some political considerations involved to your knowledge?
Congressman, there were no political considerations. The admonition of the President was to be commercial, to be tough-minded, and to be fair. And that is the direction that the staff at the Auto Task Force, of which I was a part, carried out.
Mr. Bloom, the title of today's hearing is Lasting Implications of General Motors Bailout. Wouldn't you say that the most significant lasting implication is the fact that we were able to avoid a massive disruption in the United States economy that would have been caused by the liquidation of GM? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a very fair statement.
All right. I see that I've run out of time.
The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too want to thank you for this hearing, and I believe that everyone back home certainly has a big interest in this hearing. You know, it strikes me as kind of interesting that there's so much talk about winners and losers. How about the people in Southwest Florida where there isn't an automobile manufacturer who feel like the car industry was chosen over maybe some of the businesses that they were in? So it's an interesting conversation. But my questions are going to go to you, Mr. Bloom. And just so I have perspective in this, because I'm kind of new to some of this, is it true that you spent the vast majority of your professional life prior to coming to the administration working for or on behalf of unions?
A good portion of it, yes.
And then let me ask you another question. Do you believe that the free market is nonsense?
No, I don't.
All right. Well, let me, if I could, ask for the first clip to be played.
Generally speaking, we get the joke. We know that the free market is nonsense. We know that the whole point is...
That is you, isn't it, Mr. Bloom?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So do you believe that it is appropriate for someone who has been a union leader and someone who doesn't believe in the free market to then be picked by the President and placed in charge of restructuring a private company in our American free market?
Well, first thing, I think a comment I made in jest at a speech does not represent my view on this matter, first thing. Second thing, I would leave to others whether or not the choice of my work, the choice for me to work on this is appropriate or not. And I was part of a large team. There were about a dozen people at the staff in the Treasury Department.
All right. Well, let me just get back to this. So, but that was you making that comment, and you spent most of your adult working life either working for unions or on behalf of the unions. And I believe that you gave a speech in 2006 in front of the International Association of Restructuring, Insolvency, and Bankruptcy Professionals in Arizona, in which you described a a bargaining technique, the dentist chair bargaining technique. Can you describe to us what the dentist chair bargaining technique is?
Yeah, again, in a lighthearted speech, I indicated I thought it was important that all parties to the bargain have skin in the game in order to produce the best result.
What is the dentist chair technique?
It's a reference to how a person might go into a dentist's office and make sure that the dentist doesn't hurt them.
And how would they do that?
They would they would do that by making clear that they also had leverage on the dentist.
And how do they have leverage on the dentist?
By grabbing him where it might hurt.
So you think the free market is nonsense?
I didn't say that, Congressman.
Well, okay. Well, I guess people
I
can
explained that comment.
People can see it for themselves.
Right.
You worked as either for or on behalf of unions. You believe that there's a way to bargain by making sure that the dentist feels the pain. Do you think that? Well, let me say this. There are some people who might disagree with your approach. Would you agree with that?
There were a wide variety of views on the task force about how to best carry this out. There were people in the task force who'd had experience on nothing but the business side of the House. There were those of us who'd had some more experience on the union side of the House. We all worked together and came to a consensus of the best way to do this.
All right, let me
took it forward to our principles.
If we could, we're going to play another clip here for you and tell me what you think of this.
The market is nonsense. We know that the whole point is to game the system, to beat the market, or at least find someone who will pay you a lot of money because they're convinced that there is a free lunch. We know this is largely about power, that it's an adults-only, no-limit game. We kind of agree with Mao that political power comes largely from the barrel of a gun. And we get it, that if you want a friend, you should get a dog.
Did you really just talk about Mao and that somehow, well, let me ask you this. Is that representative of the culture in the unions, the leadership in unions?
I think it's representative of trying to make a point through exaggeration.
Well, you know, through exaggeration.
Correct.
And I don't think excuse me, I don't think that Americans think that exaggerating at a time when our economy is hurting so much is the right way to go. Now, you might have made these statements earlier, but you did say that you think free market is nonsense. You described a tactic of bargaining that is not professional. You also talk about Mao and how political getting things done is at the end of a barrel. Do you think that maybe it was a mistake that you were put in a position in the first place to be part of any kind of restructuring of anything in the American free market?
That would be for others to judge.
Where did you get? How did you get into that position?
I was asked to serve by people at the Treasury Department.
Did President Obama pick you to serve?
I do not know what the President's role was in the choice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Before we turn to Mr. Johnson, just let me ask this question. What's the status of the Auto Task Force today? Is there still such an entity? Because I know your title has changed, but is there still, obviously the taxpayers still have an interest. So what's the status of the Auto Task Force
As I said in my opening remarks, Mr. Chairman, I am not at the Treasury Department anymore, but my understanding is the Auto Task Force itself was actually a group of members of the Cabinet who convened to provide oversight to the overall effort. There was then a staff group set up at the Treasury Department to do the day-to-day work. My understanding is the Treasury Department still does have a staff group that is providing oversight for our investments in those companies. I am not a part of it.
The individuals who were selected that we knew publicly as part of the task force, you were on that, Mr. Ratner first chaired it, others, names escape me now, were part of that. That group of people is no longer meeting on a regular basis, having input and oversight of the auto industry, or are they?
If you're referring to individuals like myself and Mr. Ratner, on an individual basis, we're not, obviously. But yes, there is a group at Treasury. I'm not familiar with who they are because I'm not at the Treasury, but I know there are a group of individuals at Treasury whose job it is to provide oversight to our remaining investments in the automobile industry, yes.
Okay. Thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to the rest of the subcommittee members for allowing me to attend and participate in today's oversight hearing. As some of you may know, I represent Ohio's 6th Congressional District, and a large number of Delphi retirees, both salaried and unsalaried, live in my district. I think we've heard and will continue to hear more about the unintended consequences that occur when the Federal Government bails out private industries and picks winners and losers. Clearly, the Obama administration picked winners and losers in the bailout process, and I'm especially thankful that, Mr. Chairman, that you're holding this hearing. Hopefully we'll get the administration to answer some of these questions, although now I'm seriously doubting that we'll come to that. I'm kind of appalled by what I've heard. I've got a list of questions here, but I've got to ask this first one. Did I understand you, Mr. Bloom, that you said that those comments that you made on that clip were in jest?
Some of them were in jest and some of them were exaggerations to make a point.
Well, at what point did you start laughing to make the joke? When did you deliver the punchline? Because I didn't see any laughing in that video. I didn't see a punchline in that video. I deliver speeches virtually every day. That looked like a pretty serious speech to me.
I thought my demeanor was quite lighthearted, but I guess that would be for others to judge.
Okay. Well, I'm passing judgment then. Don't understand that. Did you, Mr. Bloom, did you not say at the following at a congressional hearing about 2 years ago, from the beginning of this process, the President gave the Auto Task Force 2 clear directions regarding its approach to the auto restructurings. The first was to behave in a commercial manner by ensuring that all stakeholders were treated fairly and received neither more nor less than they would have simply because the government was involved. The second was to refrain from intervening in the day-to-day management of these companies. Did you say that?
Yes, Congressman.
Do you think that the Auto Task Force accomplished the President's first direction, specifically that all were treated fairly and received neither more or less than they would have simply because the government was involved?
Yes, I feel very strongly that our treatment, as I said in response to a prior question, that our objective, our directive, and I think the result was that people were treated commercially and fairly.
Mr. Bloom, I find it hard to believe that you or anyone else could believe that everyone was treated fairly, considering that the Delphi retirees lost 30 to 70% of their pensions, all of their health care benefits, all of their life insurance, while hourly retirees retained their full pension and health benefits. Frankly, that's almost as funny as your comment during the video clip. But they must be exaggerations, because how do you consider that fair?
Congressman, I didn't say they were treated equally. I said they were treated fairly.
Define fair.
I'm going to
define fair.
I'm going to try to, sir. What the companies did is came forward with business plans that, in their commercial judgment, provided the treatment that was required in order to successfully effectuate the bankruptcy. We looked at those plans, and as the earlier question indicated, we rejected the first version and then approved a second version. Those plans were then brought forward to bankruptcy courts. And in both cases, General Motors and Chrysler, bankruptcy judges reviewing that with nothing other than the question of accordance with the law in mind, adjudged that both those plans were reasonable, and both those plans were in full concert with bankruptcy law.
In full concert maybe with bankruptcy law, but where does the word fair come into play? How can you consider that taking away pensions, life insurance, and benefits from one group and not having that same treatment to another group be considered fair?
Because the different situation that the groups found themselves in provided the opportunity for different treatment, which the companies believed was fair. For instance, the suppliers.
But it wasn't the company. It wasn't the company. Did you not say just a few minutes ago that the administration, through the Auto Task Force, approved and disapproved of these plans?
I said the companies tabled the plans, and the administration approved the plans.
So basically, where does the buck stop, Mr. Bloom?
Clearly,
with the administration, right?
Clearly, we approved the plans. And the plans had, for instance, that the people who supplied parts to the companies received almost, in many cases, 100 cents on the dollar. We did that because the companies believed and persuaded us that to provide that level of treatment to their suppliers was critical to successfully reorganize. Likewise, the claimants for warranties who received a complete 100 cents on the dollars. We were also persuaded that while that was more than other unsecured creditors got, it was necessary and fair to effectuate the restructuring.
Mr. Bloom, my time is up. I hate to cut you off. I wish we could continue this all day because I've got a lot more questions. I would like to answer the question that my colleague answered, that you would not answer, as to whether or not you were the right person for the job. I'm going to tell you I don't think so, because of what's happened to the people that live in my district. Your idea of what's fair and what's not fair defies my understanding of the word. We teach our children that if you tell the truth, if you've done nothing wrong, everything will be okay. And yet, you don't want to talk about the Delphi situation here because of litigation, which certainly leads me to have some big questions. I'm going to assert to you that I'm going to continue digging. I hope our chairman will continue digging. One way or another, we're going to get these answers. If it were up to me, those who refuse to answer would be found in contempt of Congress. And if I have anything to say about it, that's exactly what's going to happen. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bloom, thanks for being here today. Listen, I'd like to play a clip for you because in April of 2010, General Motors began a national media campaign claiming that it had repaid the government loan in full, 5 years ahead of schedule. And here's a look at the clip, and I just want to get your opinion on this, whether it's disingenuous or not.
A lot of Americans didn't agree with giving GM a second chance. Quite frankly, I can respect that. We want to make this a company all Americans can be proud of again. That's why I'm here to announce we have repaid our government loan in full with interest, 5 years ahead of the original schedule. But there's still more to do.
I think you've seen that before.
I have.
Okay. Your opinion. Disingenuous?
It might not have been the way I would have worded it, but we made a decision.
So you would agree that it is disingenuous. Let me ask you this, because no, seriously. Being an automobile dealer all my life, and I serve on several national committees for the automobile manufacturers. One of the things, when we come out with media campaigns, marketing campaigns, the critical part of those campaigns? Making sure that everything we say is in fact true and factual. Right. And that's put through scrutiny, great scrutiny. So I would suggest that, we're going to use taxpayer funds to run a marketing campaign, that we should spend it actually on product and not in propaganda. Now, at the time this advertisement ran, Secretary Geithner said, "We are encouraged that General Motors has repaid its debt well ahead of schedule and confident that this company is on a strong path to viability. You were quoted as saying that the Treasury Department has tried to be as straight as humanly possible." And we watch this clip, and the question is, was the Treasury Department being as straight as humanly possible?
The Treasury Department didn't make that ad, sir. The Treasury Department made a decision on behalf of the administration to not intervene in the day-to-day operations of the company, including providing oversight.
I would disagree with that. I've got a lot of friends who are no longer in business because of decisions that were made. I know you weren't responsible for it directly, but you did steer the whole program. Now, in an article, and this is from a very conservative paper called the New York Times, repaying taxpayers with their own cash, New York Times wrote that what neither General Motors nor the Treasury Department disclosed was that the company simply used other funds held by the Treasury to pay off its original loan. Furthermore, the Special Inspector General for TARP wrote in its quarterly report to Congress in April 2010 that the source of funds for these quarterly payments will be other TARP funds currently held in an escrow account. Now, my question, do you think the General Motors ad campaign and the statements made by the Treasury Department told the complete truth about these loan repayments?
I'm happy to answer questions about what the Treasury Department said. I've indicated to you that we didn't make the General Motors ad, and whether we would have made it that way is something I can't comment on. I will tell you about what the Treasury Department
Just as an average guy who watches a lot of TV. No, this isn't easy. This is really easy.
I don't watch a lot of TV.
You don't?
No.
No, okay. Well, I don't watch as much as I used to.
Nor I.
But I got to tell you, when I see this type of thing going on, and we told the public, geez, General Motors is working so hard and they're paying back all their money. What we didn't tell them was they were using taxpayer money to disingenuously make a statement they were actually paying off their loan. They, in fact, did not. And I got to tell you, I lived that. I walked that walk. And I understand the difference between taxpayer-funded loan repayments and private individuals paying back the loans that they took out and they're responsible for. I will tell you, this was not a good program. It did, in fact, pick winners and losers. It did, in fact, use taxpayer money. Every penny of this money came out of taxpayers' pockets. And we have huge loans. And I like what you said earlier about part of the problem with these companies where they made promises they couldn't keep. And I got to tell you, I hope we use that same type of philosophy when I read about how the President made his decision on they weren't going to allow these companies to continue to operate the way they operated, knowing that it was leading to the path of destruction. They weren't going to lend them money to do that. I hope we use that same philosophy when we talk about raising the debt ceiling on a business that really operates. General Motors pales in comparison to the way this business is being run, and it's all being done the same way with taxpayer dollars. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back my time, but I got to tell you, this is one of the most disappointing examples of how the government gets involved and in over its head and putting people in a position that they absolutely did pick winners and losers. The biggest losers in this whole thing, the American taxpayer.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Kucinich.
I want to say to my friend, Mr. Kelly, some of the questions that he's raised as somebody who's been involved in with auto dealers are questions that I raised with Mr. LaTourette in the last Congress, and those are legitimate questions. Now, I have a slightly different take on this, and Mr. Bloom, rather than an outright bailout, wasn't a support of GM and the auto industry truly an investment, not only in auto companies themselves, but in communities, in the country, and America's overall skill set to continue with manufacturing sectors that could have been lost, actually, if the big three had gone down.
I think a number of independent observers, Congressman, have indicated that if General Motors and Chrysler had failed, the auto supply base would have likely quickly failed with it. Ford could have very well gone in after that. The CEO of Ford supported the auto restructuring for that very reason. I think the entire ability of the United States to make cars was at risk at that time.
Well, my colleague's right about the role of the taxpayers. What the taxpayers put in value, the taxpayers receive value back?
I think what the taxpayers got back is hopefully they're going to get, they have an automobile industry. They have all those people working. They have all those communities with that support, all those dealers who, and some dealers unfortunately were not able to keep their dealership, but the overwhelming majority were, and if General Motors had failed.
That was a private decision, was it not?
That was a decision by General Motors.
I wasn't happy with many of those decisions. We had some good people in the greater Cleveland area who lost their dealership.
No one could be happy with those decisions, but it is worth noting that if General Motors had failed, every single dealer would have lost their dealership.
Now, Mr. Speaker already. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent for a November 2010 report published by the Economic Policy Institute to be put in the record.
Without objection, so ordered. And while we're here again, your colleague, or our colleague, Mr. Kildee, has a letter that he'd like submitted for the record too.
Oh, thank you. I just want to quote from that report, which I've asked to be submitted in the record. It said the return on investment for the public from the restructuring of the domestic auto industry was extraordinary. Federal, state, and local governments saved between $10 and $78 for every dollar invested in the auto industry restructuring plan. Federal taxpayers are likely to recoup most or all of their investment in GM and will enjoy a net gain of at least $61 billion on their $5 billion to $7 billion investment in the auto industry recovery plan, unquote. Now, back to Mr. Bloom, would you agree that the actual return on Treasury's investment in the domestic auto industry in terms of actual return plus amount saved will be greater than the amount of financial taxpayer assistance extended to companies?
I think a number of independent studies have indicated that, Congressman.
And you say a number of independent studies. Can you present this committee with any independent studies that indicate that?
We'd be happy to provide you with additional data on that.
So would you tell this committee, what are the taxpayers getting out of their investment in GM besides just monetary payback?
Well, again, I think they're getting the fact that we have an automobile industry here in America. General Motors employs tens and tens of thousands of people. The supply base employs 3 times what GM employs. There are tens and tens and thousands of dealers. There are numerous communities, small businesses. When a large manufacturing plant closes, wherever it is, the impact on the overall community is enormous. And so all those communities that have GM plants, all of which would have lost those employers, would have suffered far, far greater harm than, in fact, they suffered during the recession. And your example of Lordstown, for better or for worse, is only one of dozens of what we would have seen across this country if we'd allowed General Motors and Chrysler to fail.
I want to say again, that my colleagues in this room who have complained quite correctly about the government picking winners and losers, I've joined them on that theme with respect to what happened in Wall Street, because I not only voted against the bailouts, I was one of the leaders against the bailouts, but I'm looking at something that's a little bit different from the finance economy, which has paper transactions and that actually works to put people out of work. This is American manufacturing. This is our core. This is part of our strategic industrial base. And while some could argue that what the government did was actually pick a winner, if that is true, the winner it picked was the American automotive industry and the American auto workers and all of the small businesses that depend on that industry. So I just wanted to mention that, and I have a great deal of respect for my colleagues who are concerned about how taxpayers' money is being spent here. And I think in this one, it sounds like the Auto Task Force was cognizant of their responsibilities.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Snowbarger, we haven't forgotten about you. I guarantee I'll have at least one question for you at some point.
I appreciate
but I first
that.
want to go to Mr. Bloom. You said earlier we did not involve ourselves in the day-to-day operations. That's your statement.
Yes, sir.
Can we put up on the slide just the email from Mr. Feldman to? Oh, we have it. Okay, good. So can you look at this email then?
I'd like to, sir, but I can't.
Okay. Well, I'll read it for you. Have you guys? And this is from Mr. Feldman, part of the Auto Task Force, correct?
Yes.
You know him?
Yes.
Served on the task force with him? Okay. Yes. Have you guys begun a dialogue? This is to General Motors. Have you begun a dialogue with the UAW over your desire to see the hourly plan terminated? Question mark. At a minimum, this could get messy, and UAW should probably be brought into the loop. You aware of this correspondence between the Auto Task Force, the group you served on?
I wasn't. I think this is I don't think I'm copied on this email.
Well, let me just ask this question. Is that involvement of the Auto Task Force in day-to-day operation?
I think this is a matter that touches on the Delphi litigation, so I'm unfortunately not in a position
to discuss it. Let's go to the next one. Let's go to the next one. Do we have the next one? This is, I think, from Jenny Ingebretson to Greg Martin at General Motors. Greg, we would ask that you move the reference to Treasury down to the third paragraph, taking it out of the lead. So this is on a press release that was going to go out, where we now have the Auto Task Force involving themselves with General Motors on a press release. So again, I just want to ask, is this involvement in day-to-day operations?
No, I think what this is involvement regarding the Treasury Department. So in other words, when the company is talking about us, meaning the Treasury Department, I think it's proper that we would have an interest in how we be characterized.
Well, some would argue this, Mr. Bloom. Some would argue if Treasury is involving themselves in press releases that the company is doing, but not making any other decisions, not picking winners and losers, not deciding which manufacturing facilities stay open, which stay closed, even though we got billions of taxpayer dollars at risk, someone would say that's really what's going on. This is what the Auto Task Force did. They were coordinating how press releases went out, but But GM made the decisions on which facilities stayed open and which ones were closed.
What we were doing is
But I'm just asking this: do you see how someone could gather and reach that conclusion?
No, I wouldn't.
Really?
Congressman. I think
Really?
what we did. Yes, I would answer the question. What we did is, if General Motors was going to talk about the Treasury Department, we would obviously want it to be done properly. General Motors came forward to the Treasury Department with a restructuring plan. We scrutinized that plan. We criticized that plan. We examined that plan. But we did not.
Let me ask
say
you
to the
something.
company,
Can we look at that plan? Let me ask you this: the first restructuring plan that you guys gave the thumbs down to, are members of Congress allowed to see that?
I believe that. I believe those plans were actually posted on the web, the February 7th.
Because the last time I got a chance to talk about this in the Judiciary Committee, we were told that was proprietary information. We couldn't look at that.
To the extent the companies provided us information under confidentiality agreements.
So we can't see what you saw.
I didn't say that. I said to the extent the companies provided us information that they believed implicated their proprietary technologies or business plans. So we were not in a position.
Well, answer my question. We wouldn't be able to see the same thing you saw.
I'm happy to take
yes
back.
Or no?
I'm happy to take back a particular request, and if there's a document.
Well, if it's changed because it was no before, I would like to see what you saw. You made a decision. GM had a restructuring plan. You said no. Yet you're not involved in day-to-day operations, yet you're influencing press releases and everything else. We'd like to see the same plan you saw.
If you have documents you wish to see, I'm happy to review the list. I'm not at Treasury, but I'm sure Treasury would be happy to review the list and provide you those documents that would be appropriate.
Let me put up one more email. This is from General Motors to Treasury. It's indicated this in this morning's call, so I understand you probably had daily calls, weekly calls. It says in this morning's call, so there was some reference to a call that was taken, I assume some kind of conference call. We will await a further, quote, temperature check from Jenny on whether to go Friday. This was an announcement on your new small car. So again, timing when the company will announce what it's going to do, Auto Task Force was given the thumbs up or thumbs down to that, yet no influence, no picking winners or losers, no involvement in day-to-day operations. You still stand by that statement?
Yes.
You see this here, though?
Please.
Temperature check, getting a temperature check from the Auto Task Force before GM can release another press release?
Again, if General Motors.
Well, no, they're not talking about Treasury. They're talking about a new car they're building. You can't say this involves Treasury.
I believe this press release was.
This is about a new small car.
Again, I don't know the specifics of this particular press release. We obviously communicated with General Motors on a regular basis, particularly prior to the bankruptcy. We communicated them on a regular basis regarding their plans. But that did not mean that we gave them direction about which plants to close or which cars to make.
It seems to me you just can't. I mean, common sense says you can't have it both ways. You can't have all this taxpayer money at risk, an Auto Task Force selected by the President, you replace the board, you replace the CEO of General Motors, and say we're not running the company. It's got to be one or the other.
We absolutely did.
Yet you maintain this fine line, and yet you're influencing how they write their press release.
What I said was, I said in my statement, we absolutely were involved in picking the Board of Directors at the conclusion of the bankruptcy, and as I said, after the bankruptcy, we relied on the Board of Directors to be responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operation of the company.
Let me do one question here, and we'll go a second round. We'll go first to Mr. Kucinich, and then Mr. Kelly and Mr. Johnson. Mr. Snowbarger, throughout this process, what kind of interaction was there between the Auto Task Force and because you were heading the Pension Guarantee Board then? Throughout this process, you were running. You were involved with the Delphi in this process. So, what kind of interaction took place between the two of you?
In regard to General Motors?
With regard to both Delphi, General Motors overall.
My recollection was that very early in the process, PBGC had a conversation with Mr. Ratner. I believe Mr. Bloom was invited to that meeting, but was held up at another occasion, at which we discussed the consequences of a General Motors failure on the pension system of General Motors and what the impact of that might be on the pension insurance system.
What discussions did they have with you relative to the hourly being topped off and not the salary?
None.
Any comments, any correspondence that they gave you on that specific question?
I don't recall any, no.
Okay. We'll go. Ranking member is recognized for an additional 5 minutes. If our second round, of questioning.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that, that the Chair's line of inquiry here, whether or not the Auto Task Force was running GM, it's an appropriate line of inquiry. You know, the committee has an interest in knowing that. I would have an interest in knowing that because if the outcome was so stunning, it may give you more credit than at this point you apparently are willing to want to claim. But I want to say, Mr. Chairman, I'm going. Okay, when the chair comes back, I'm going to state this for the record because it relates to something he said, and I'll be glad to enter in a colloquy with him if he has any response. But the email that was put into evidence that the Chair had quoted about the press release may inadvertently prove Mr. Bloom's case because the email shows that, that Treasury is actually not in control. If you look at it, there's a quote, Greg, we would ask that you move the reference to Treasury down to the third paragraph, taking it out of the lead, unquote. If they were in control, they wouldn't ask. They would tell. They'd be dictating. And that didn't happen. It's just a subtle difference, but I just want to call that to the attention of the committee. And what the email does is it concerns GM's characterization of Treasury. And, you know, of course, you can have an interest in a characterization without actually dictating the policy. That's the point that I wanted to make. I have a few questions to Mr. Snowbarger. The PBGC takes over a pension when a corporation decides to stop offering the pension to its retirees, either through a bankruptcy or corporate decision not to do so. Can you briefly describe the circumstances that led to the creation of the PBGC to protect defined benefit pensions?
First of all, let me correct a misimpression there. Companies can't just decide not to continue their pension plan.
Well, they have to file.
Well, but they have to show that they cannot continue their business
okay.
and maintain the plan.
So can you tell us what?
Well, I don't know how far back you want to go. If you want to go back to
well, let me go one step. No, you know, for the retirement plans that have been taken over by the PBGC, have you found that their original sponsoring corporations had been making the appropriate contributions to their retirement funds to keep them fully funded or not?
Pension plans don't come to the PBGC if they've been properly funded.
So my understanding is that Delphi Corporation failed to make necessary contributions to its retirement plans, and when PBGC assumed trusteeship of them, you found them to be underfunded. Is that true?
That's correct.
And when PBGC takes over an underfunded retirement plan, how does the PBGC meet its funding obligations, particularly when a pension fund for which it assumes trusteeship does not have enough assets even to pay the benefits that PBGC is allowed to pay under law?
We basically have four sources of revenue. One is premiums that are set by Congress. The second is recoveries and recoveries from bankruptcies and from settlements with corporations, investment income, and then bankruptcy recoveries, which are typically pennies on the dollar.
So do you have the ability in a bankruptcy process to recover assets that can be put to use to pay pension benefits?
We are unsecured creditors in bankruptcy for most purposes.
And that means?
That means pennies on the dollar if there are assets at all.
Does Congress normally provide top-up support for insufficient pensions that PBGC has taken over?
No.
Would that require special legislation?
Yes.
Can you meet your current, the long-term obligations with your current assets?
If you look at the long-term picture at this point, we are $23 billion in deficit. We have plenty of money for meeting immediate obligations, but over the long term, we're $23 billion short assets to liabilities.
And could you translate that into how many millions of retirees are actually looking at receiving or having retirement benefits that are far below what they anticipated when they were in the workforce?
Well, we cover the pensions of approximately 1.5 million people. Approximately 80% of those, we pay the full amount of their benefits, and so they aren't reduced, more like 84%. So it's only 16% that receive some reduction in benefits, although that can be fairly substantial.
So just to wrap it up, Mr. Chairman, those 1.5, how many, 1.5?
1.5 million.
1.5 million. They're in trouble, and the PBGC is in trouble because the corporations who had made a commitment to fund those programs didn't keep their end of the deal. Isn't that right?
Again, plans don't come to PBGC unless they're underfunded.
So is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the ranking member. Also, Mr. Johnson, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bloom, did you know when you were working at the Treasury that GM was paying their loan with the taxpayer dollars from one pot to another? Did you know that?
When General Motors...
That's a yes or no. Did you know that?
I'm going to try to give you a complete answer if I could.
I'd just like a yes or no. Did you know they were taking out of one taxpayer pot, putting it into another?
We knew that they were using their corporate resources, which were legally theirs, to repay the loan.
And it was taxpayer funding. You knew that, right?
We knew that all funds invested in General Motors had come from either ourselves or the Canadian government.
Okay. Did you have any sense of responsibility to the American people to divulge that? I mean, this is the Treasury. This is the group that handles and manages the nation's wealth, and it's being pillaged. Did you not have a sense of responsibility to let the American people know that a corporation that had defaulted was playing a shell game with taxpayer dollars?
I don't think in any way, shape, or form that we deceived the American people, and I don't think anybody was being pillaged in any way, shape, or form. The Treasury
Department... Do you think it was appropriate to claim that they were paying down their debt from one pot of taxpayer dollars that was essentially a prop-up in the first place into another?
I think the Treasury's characterization of what General Motors did, which is that we invested money in this company. After we made the investment, the money was the property of the company. At that point, they chose to use some of their corporate resources to repay a debt that they had taken out from the Treasury.
You called it an investment. I think the American taxpayer saw it as a bailout, right? That was money that was supposed to be paid back, correct?
The money was invested in three forms. Some of it was in the form of preferred stock, some of it was in the form of common stock, and some of it was in the form of a debt instrument.
Okay. We got to move on. I've got another email clip that I want to have shown up here, if it could come up. This one, you said a few minutes ago that you had no specific knowledge of the small car. What's it called? The revised small car release. Look at the CC line up there that's highlighted in red. Who's Ron Bloom?
No, I didn't say that, Congressman. What I said is I wasn't on the email you referred to Mr. Feldman.
You said you had no specific knowledge of that release.
No, I did
Oh, that's
not.
what you said. We can have it read back to you if you'd like us to read it back.
Yeah, that would be fine. If I said that, I misspoke. What I said was I was not involved in the email that was asked about Mr. Feldman. I was aware that General Motors had made decisions regarding the construction of a new facility or the revitalization of a facility to make small cars. Yes, I was aware of that.
I think it's pretty clear that you jest with a very straight face, because I'm having trouble understanding when you're joking and when you're not, because this all looks like a joke to me and to the American taxpayer. Let's move on. Mr. Snowbarger, was the PBGC pressured by the Auto Task Force or anyone else involved in the bailout process to make the determination to terminate the Delphi salaried employees' pension plans?
No.
If not, why then did the PBGC decide to terminate a plan that was funded in a similar manner and at a similar level as the average of the top 100 pension funds in America at the time? Why was that decision made?
Well, I disagree with your characterization that it was funded at that level. We applied the same standards to all of the Delphi plans, and the standards are in ERISA, and by statute, in other words, and we made the decision on that basis, as well as the fact that Delphi was no longer
We've got a short time fuse here. Why then is the PBGC fighting so hard against releasing the records of the PBGC decision-making process that led up to that determination?
I disagree with that characterization.
Have you released those records?
I believe we have. Yes.
You have released those records?
I believe so, yes. We've released them to this committee as well as to the Special IG for the TARP, as well as to GAO, as well as Freedom of Information Act requests from various Delphi salary employees.
Okay, well,
and in the court case as well.
I apologize then. I was misinformed. Thank you for clearing that up. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. I think this is regrettable, and I can assure you that I'm going to continue to look for the answers to find out how we rectify this and bring justice to the Delphi retirees.
You can go to Mr. Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Burton from Indiana.
I apologize for just getting here, Mr. Chairman, but one of the concerns that I've had, and I'm not sure who can answer this question, is why the salaried employees, and I know I've heard that you can't comment on this because it's in litigation, but to the degree that you can answer any questions, I'd like to know why the salaried employees got chopped up so badly compared to the others that were under contract. It just doesn't make any sense to me, and it doesn't seem fair. I mean, when I look at, I don't know if there's a chart. Do we have any of those charts? I think you said there was a chart, a slide we could show. Hello? Oh, there we have it. If you look at this slide, I just want to concentrate on the last column there. Those are the salaried employees. You see they took a 100% cut in their life insurance, 100% cut in health care, 100% cut in their vision and dental, 100% cut in medical, and between 30 and 70% cut in their base pensions. And I just don't understand why. What did they do that was so bad that they didn't get the same consideration as those that were under contract?
Well, Congressman, as I indicated earlier, I'm not in a position to comment specifically on the allegations in the Delphi litigation. I can
excuse me 1 second. I don't think it's allegations. You may not be able to comment, but these aren't allegations. A lot of these salaried employees live in my district, and I've talked to them about that. So this isn't, you know, allegations. They were cut like this. So anyhow, go ahead.
Well, again, I'm not in a position to comment on that. I am certainly in a position to agree with you that many stakeholders in the entire General Motors and Chrysler bankruptcy unfortunately received far, far less than they were promised. And not everyone received the exact same amount as a percentage of what they were promised. As I indicated earlier, for instance, a number of the suppliers, probably many of whom do business in your district, received 100 cents on the dollars. And that was because the company came forward with a restructuring plan that they believed provided the treatment of the various stakeholders that was required in order to successfully effectuate the bankruptcy. We did not insist that they pay everybody 100 cents on the dollar, because that would have cost the taxpayer a multiple of what was eventually invested in General Motors. And we did judge that the management had made a good faith effort to be commercial and fair in their judgments about how to treat people.
Let me interrupt here. I mean, this is pretty damning when you look at this, because the union workers that were under contract and the others that were under contract, they were treated at least somewhat fairly. In fact, some of them were treated very well considering the bankruptcy. But the salaried employees, just for what reason I know not, just got killed. And it just seems almost un-American that you would show deference to one segment of the employee population for a company like General Motors, and then throw the rest of them to the dogs, and it just seems really bad. I'm not saying this because they're from Delphi has a plant near the Kokomo in our district. I'm not saying it just because of that. I'd say this about any company in the United States. If there's a bankruptcy, it seems like there should be shared pain, and there certainly is no shared pain as far as the salaried employees were concerned.
It may be, Congressman, that the bankruptcy laws of the nation should be reviewed on that question, but the company's action were entirely consistent with bankruptcy law. 2 judges ruled over that very, very carefully, extensive hearings, and judged that the company's actions were completely in concert with bankruptcy law. I agree with you that it's terrible when any individual or business isn't able to receive the entire promise that they were made.
Well,
all stakeholders to this tragedy had to take sacrifice, and there were circumstances where some received more than others. It was based on the commercial judgments, as I said.
Well, if judges rendered that kind of a decision based upon current bankruptcy laws, we probably ought to take another look at them. Because if a major corporation goes bankrupt like this and leaves one segment of the employee population hanging out to dry, that needs to be reevaluated. So I will talk to my staff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the extra time. I will talk to my staff about taking a look at the bankruptcy laws. Thank you.
All right. Thank the gentleman from Indiana. Also, back to the ranking member, Mr. Kucinich.
I want to thank the Chairman. I want to thank the gentleman from Indiana, because the point that he makes about people in his district and Delphi employees who were not protected in the bankruptcy is well received here. And as I mentioned earlier, when Chairman Jordan was in the chair, I look forward to working with my colleagues to see what we might do to be able to provide some relief to those individuals who were essentially left out. Because all that we're trying to do here is to make sure that our constituencies who may have been involved in this are not going to be destroyed financially, which goes to the question, Mr. Bloom, that the concern that so many members have expressed here about what's happened to dealerships. Now, the Auto Task Force didn't deal in that question. I understand that. You've testified to that. But, in my district and other places around the country, GM essentially put people out of business like that, people who had auto dealerships in their families for generations. And there's a lot of hard feelings about that. And those feelings are not going to easily go away, because there are people who were embedded in a community, gave everything they had to a business, and then suddenly, with the government providing the money, this is what gets people. The government provided the money, you save the corporation turns around and destroys dealerships. So you can respond.
Congressman, nobody, again, is glad that General Motors believed that in order to survive, it had to substantially restructure its dealer base. But General Motors, unfortunately, had become a much smaller company than it was when it had the number of dealers it had. And the company believed that in order to be successful and to not have the investments that the President made simply be for naught, that they needed to rationalize their dealer network. We examined that proposition in addition to many other propositions, including that they close factories. And the Chairman pointed out earlier that one of the factories was closed in his district. That's a terrible thing when a factory is closed and all those workers are told to go home. But the alternative was no General Motors at all. And if there had been no General Motors at all, then everybody would have lost their job, everybody would have lost their pension. Mr. Snowberger began to talk about what would have happened to the PBGC if the General Motors pension plan had terminated or the Chrysler plan had terminated. They have 1.5 million beneficiaries. General Motors all by itself has almost that many. So we have to evaluate this against the real-world alternatives. And the real-world alternatives, if General Motors is allowed to entirely liquidate and everybody loses everything.
I understand, but you need to understand, from our side of the table here, is that a whole lot of this looked arbitrary to us. Just so you know, I mean, I'm not putting this on you. I'm just saying that's the way it looked. You need to be aware of that. I just want to
I appreciate that.
Insert something for the record here, Mr. Chairman. My friend Mr. Johnson inserted into the record an email from Greg Martin referencing the revisions made by Frederick Henderson. And I think it's important to identify who the people are. Greg Martin was an official at GM. Frederick Henderson was the CEO of GM. And the fact that Mr. Bloom was on a CC really doesn't prove anything here, I don't think, except that other than the fact that GM was in control of GM, the Treasury Department represented observers having to ask, not able to dictate to GM. And, you know, frankly, I think that's what we've found here, that GM throughout the bailout remained under private control. And I don't see from this memo, which has Mr. Ratner and Mr. Bloom up here as a CC, that this, coming from GM officials, that this in any way indicates that it was the non-GM officials who were leading the dance. So I just want to point that out. And again, I do that because I understand the concerns that my colleagues have, share many of those concerns. I just wanted to correct the record, and I thank the Chairman. Thank you.
And I thank the ranking member. I'm going to allow myself 5 minutes, Mr. Bloom, Mr. Snowbarger. And I think today the most important thing that we can understand about this hearing, it's not about Democrats, it's not about Republicans, it's about the American people. And I would think that this hearing is indeed essential when we talk about taxpayer dollars being invested. If you could, Mr. Bloom, there was $50.2 billion in total TARP assistance. Could you tell me how that was divided up?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with that particular number. There's 49.5 is the total assistance to GM. So I'm familiar with that number, and I'm trying to be responsive to your question. I'm not familiar with a 50.2 number.
Okay. Do you know how that was divided up?
Well, again, the rough numbers are that the total assistance provided to General Motors was $49.5 billion. The total assistance provided to Chrysler was $12.5 billion. There was $1.5 billion provided to Chrysler Financial, $17.2 billion provided to General Motors Acceptance Corporation, now called Alley Financial, and there's about $4.1 billion between assistance provided to suppliers and to guarantee warranties. Not all of those funds were drawn down, and so the amount of funds that were drawn down is about $4 billion less than that, but that's roughly the total amounts that were at one point allocated to those companies.
All right. Well, I know quite a bit of money was put in escrow. And as we referenced early, some of the monies that were put in escrow were used to pay down the loan with interest. I'm just going to walk you through something that I've done this for many, many years. And I'm sure most of the people in the gallery have done the same. When you buy an automobile, there are stipulations put there's stipulations put in the what we would call putting a deal together. A lot of it has to do with the total amount of money you're going to borrow, and the stipulation in most cases requires some down payment money. And I'm just trying to relate this so that the American people understand this. The down payment money that is required at the time an individual buys a car is usually referred to as cash. And it is truly cash. It's not part of another loan that's structured, because that in fact does distort the total amount that that car is owed on. And I think what bothers me more than anything else, we used borrowed money, taxpayer money, in order to pay off a loan. It wasn't cash that was paid down, and I don't know that I'm getting that across. And my point is, again, this is for the American people to understand. This truly was in very odd and very strange bankruptcy, and one that is so complicated that in 40 days it could rise from the dead and be on its feet again and be no problem. No problem. That truly is, that was a remarkable activity. I know myself that had I declared bankruptcy, I don't think I'd be given that same opportunity. So the American people really do need to know that this was, in fact, and as the President described it, an historic structuring of a loan. But the bottom line is these are all taxpayer dollars. And I think that's the thing that's the most discouraging. And you made it reference earlier that the new GM, I have absolutely no idea that the old GM is still in bankruptcy. The new GM is not. General Motors has survived. It would have survived in some form, having gone through bankruptcy on its own. The old GM is gone forever, and we know that because it did follow a little different route and bought into a program that absolutely led it down a road that it could never recover from. It's just difficult to sit here and listen to the premise that General Motors, in its wisdom, was able to eliminate private businessmen, people who had franchises. I was one of them. One of my franchises was taken away, not because I didn't know how to run it, not because I wasn't profitable, not because I wasn't hitting my market share and doing all the things that I had to do. I have friends who absolutely, not only were they terminated as dealers, they chose to exit as individuals. Some people took their own lives because a business was taken from them by a procedure that had absolutely nothing to do with natural events. So while this may have been historic in the President's way of talking about it, it was absolutely catastrophic for small business people. And I'm not blaming you, but I'm saying the American people better understand that there is something going on right now that makes absolutely no sense to me. And I got to tell you, from somebody who was a General Motors dealer now for 60 years, General Motors never gave me anything. Every car, every part, everything I've ever done was purchased with my own money or my family's money. So to sit there, and I'm not blaming you again, I'm just saying this premise that General Motors could not afford its dealers is absolutely ridiculous. We were all on our own. We were living outside of that home, and we were supporting our own families. So I think the American people have always believed that they want what's fair, not what's legal, because I am, at 63 years old, I know there's no correlation between what's fair and what's legal. It's absolutely horrendous that we were able to do these type of things to individuals who had made such great contributions in their communities. And if you don't believe that, I would suggest you go into any of these little communities and find out these dealerships that are no longer there. Their names are still in the outfield fences of all the little leagues. They were the people that supported the Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts, their local bands, everything that was going on in their high schools. These are the guys they go to first. To me, picking and choosing winners and losers is absolutely up to the free market. It is not up to the government. The government made a very serious mistake, and they overstepped their bounds. I do appreciate you being here today. Is there, okay, I will recognize Mr. Issa for 5 minutes, please.
I would just say one thing, and I would agree with almost everything you said. Where I would respectfully disagree is if the government had not stepped in, I do not believe General Motors would have faced a fate other than a complete liquidation and the elimination of all dealerships who sold General Motors cars.
Well, we'll never know.
Well, we won't know, sir, but at the time, I think we could find no evidence whatsoever that private capital markets would finance this company in bankruptcy.
And I do understand that, but there was bankruptcy that they could go through, a structured bankruptcy. Unfortunately, it was taken out of their hands and it was taken care of by the government. No, listen, I got to tell you, I was there. I walked the walk.
I understand.
Okay, and I know people who lost not only their dealerships, but they took another exit too. And I got to tell you, it was absolutely horrible, and it should never, ever, ever happen again. And at that point, I'm going to recognize Mr. Issa for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chairman. Mr. Bloom, I'm just old enough, and unlike the Chairman, I wasn't in the car business directly, but I was a supplier to the car business. Do you remember Potemkin Cadillac in New York? Remember ever hearing that name? Largest Cadillac dealer in America, largest limousine provider. Victor Potemkin once challenged General Motors by trying to get a replacement of the President. You know how General Motors fixed that? They paid him twice what his dealership was worth, then handed it to Roger Penske just to get him out of the business. At that time, they didn't have you to do their dirty work, so they simply paid him a lot of money to get rid of a thorn in their side, who they felt was agitating against basically the then President. Do you think, at least in some way, that General Motors had a reason to make selections that had something to do other than with the absolute monetary, hardcore, dollar and cents best interest when they used you in order to cut their number of dealers?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with the story you have related, so I can't speak to it.
It's famous enough that I'd say it knowing Roger Penske is a dear, wonderful guy that I've raced against, but the bottom line is General Motors over the years hated some of their dealers, loved others, cut all kinds of deals. The difference is they didn't have the government to do it free for them.
Congressman, as I said, I don't have any evidence one way or the other. I'm not doubting the veracity of your story. You asked if I knew it.
But do you think that you were at least
as to your question,
right,
which I can answer.
Since in retrospect we found dealerships that made sense that were cut and others that were preserved, there were huge amounts of mistakes in that decision process.
I think that what we did when we looked over General Motors' plan to rationalize their dealer network is we satisfied ourselves that the company had acted reasonably. We did not review dealer-by-dealer decisions because, again, we did not want to intervene in the day-to-day operation.
So in that case, you were vulnerable to whatever their underlying reasons were because you weren't able to audit the legitimacy of something that was ordinarily not doable.
Again, we were not in a position, and we did not want to place ourselves, because we did not think it would be appropriate to put ourselves in a position to become the management of the company and to decide whether it be a dealership decision or a factory decision.
Well, let me follow up with a question. I chair this committee, but I also I also serve on the Judiciary Committee, and I was there for the revisions to the patent, or to the, I'm there for the patent, but I was there for the revisions to the bankruptcy laws. Do you think that what you did in circumventing the bankruptcy laws, what otherwise would ordinarily have happened in any conventional bankruptcy, and bypassing the decisions that could have been made not by you but by a bankruptcy judge and other trustees, do you think that you set a good precedent for a model for the future, a bad precedent, or do you think you're simply a one-time event?
I think the two bankruptcy judges have found that we did absolutely nothing to circumvent the bankruptcy laws, that this was in fact an ordinary course bankruptcy, and so I don't think there is any change in the basic status of our nation's bankruptcy laws.
So you think that maintaining the pensions for union workers while screwing the salary workers was in the ordinary course of what would have happened in any other bankruptcy? Isn't it true in any other bankruptcy everybody would have been in the same pot of losing their pensions? They would have been all or nothing? This differentiation has never happened in bankruptcy to my knowledge. Has it happened to your knowledge?
Yes, quite a bit, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And your basis is that salary people aren't important, but union workers are?
No, it's not my basis. My basis is companies make decisions of how best to effectuate bankruptcies, and sometimes that decides that certain unsecured creditors, sometimes like suppliers, sometimes like warranty holders, are treated differently because the company concludes that in order to maintain
I suspect that you would probably find that bondholders getting a haircut ahead of general creditors is also typical. The gentleman, the former chairman, wants a little time, so I'd yield the remaining time to him.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for yielding. The bankruptcy judge just approved the plan. They didn't actually make any decision on how the funds were to be disseminated. They just approved the overall plan.
I think what they did, Congressman, was determine that the bankruptcy laws of our country had been followed.
Well, okay, but they made no changes. They just said that the bankruptcy laws had been followed.
Yes.
But they didn't actually make any determination on whether there was fairness or not. I ask unanimous consent for another minute or so.
I think the determination was that the bankruptcy laws had been followed, that they hadn't been turned on their head or any phrase like that.
Okay. You were on the auto task force. You were part of that. I'm looking here at some notes. It says in a piece of correspondence, have you guys begun a dialogue with the UAW over your desire to see the hourly plan terminated? At a minimum, this could get messy, and the UAW should probably be brought into the loop. Do you know about that comment?
Yeah, I answered a question about that earlier.
Well, answer it again.
No, I'm happy to, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't particularly on that particular email chain, and given that that is part of the litigation, I'm not in a position to comment.
Well, did you say this at a dinner? There was a dinner, and it was reported by David Shepardson, Washington correspondent for the Detroit News, at a farewell dinner of the Auto Task Force held in the restaurant Rosa Mexicano in late July 2009, that you allegedly said, I did this all for the unions.
No, I did not say that.
You didn't say that?
No, sir.
So you were misquoted by the...
That's correct.
Well, I'm going to call that guy up and ask him. If you said that, you know that you're under oath here.
I am fully aware.
You made no comment like that at all?
No, sir.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, we'll check that out. I'm going to call this reporter, and we'll just see what he said. The other thing is, though, you did see the graph, and you did see how the salaried employees were treated as opposed to the union workers.
I did.
You did. And you were involved in that decision-making process.
No, I was not.
Who was involved in the decision?
General Motors came forward with a plan. As I said, I'm not in a position to comment on the particulars of the Delphi situation. But as in all the aspects of this bankruptcy, General Motors came forward with a plan about how they thought best to reorganize themselves. We looked at that plan.
And the Auto Task Force had nothing to do with that?
No, I said no. We had very much to do with it.
But you can't comment because it's in litigation.
This particular question about the treatment of the Delphi salaried employees, I'm not in a position to comment on. I'd be delighted to talk with you about the treatment of other stakeholders, about other groups, about other aspects of the bankruptcy. Happy to talk with you about that at whatever length you'd like.
Well, if you look at the graph, the other employees weren't treated all that badly. The union workers, the UAW was treated extremely well. Some of the others were treated a little less well, but the salaried employees really got screwed.
I think
and if you were on the Auto Task Force and had anything to do with that, you ought to be ashamed of that. That's terrible. Those people should never have been treated like that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank the member. And just 1 minute, Mr. Bloom, and we're going to be finished here. We've had references to the fact that it was the Board of Directors, the General Motors Board of Directors, that made these decisions.
Let me try to be more accurate. What I said was we were involved in putting a new Board of Directors in after the bankruptcy.
Okay.
During the run-up to the bankruptcy, it was the management. There was a Board of Directors, but it was the GM management.
Could you, if you could, because I know you know the answer to this.
Yeah.
Under the old GM, how was that Board of Directors determined?
Elected by the shareholders.
And under the new GM, how was that Board of Directors determined?
The original board was selected.
No,
the original board of the new GM was put forward by the Treasury Department as the largest shareholder.
Okay, so to say that really the decisions were not made by the Treasury Department, these are all folks that were appointed, in fact, by this administration. These were not elected by shareholders. Is that a correct statement?
We were the largest shareholder.
I understand. I understand.
That was who. But I think the distinction I was trying to make, Congressman, was that as the employees of the administration, we did not make these decisions. After the bankruptcy, we entrusted a group of independent men and women.
I understand that, but I also know that the appointments came out of the administration. I think you and I both know that. So having said that, there's a huge difference between a shareholder, the old GM that was elected by shareholders of the Board of Directors, and a new GM that, because the way you divvied up the company, you established who the Board of the Directors would be. So it wasn't really done in the same way that it had been done in the past. So I think I think it's important to be honest about it. I am going to recognize the ranking member for 1 minute.
Just briefly, and I thank the gentleman for yielding, because this question about whether or not the government controls GM's decision, that's the focal point here, and the points that Chair just made, Mr. Kelly made, the relationship between the new board, decision makers, that results in a lot of dealers closing. I see that as a legitimate line of question, but one of the things it does not establish, and I just want to say this for the record, is Mr. Bloom himself had anything to do with it. I mean, that's, and you kind of indicated that when you were charging on behalf of those who lost their dealerships, that it's not necessarily that Mr. Bloom had anything to do with it, but I think the Chair is well taken in probing further how those decisions were made. I think the public has a right to know. I think the public has a right to know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to thank the panel. Mr. Bloom, thank you very much. Mr. Snowbauer, thank you very much. And we are going to recess for 1 minute, and then we have a final panel after that. Thanks so much.